The day my sister got married, I was not supposed to be in the room. That was the plan. That was what she had decided, 3 months before the wedding, in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and ended with a click.
No screaming.
No dramatic music. Just 4 minutes, and then silence, and then the sound of my own breathing in an empty apartment that I had furnished over 11 years, mostly alone. She said, "Mara, I love you, but I think it's better if you're not there. It'll be less complicated." Less complicated. I'm an accountant. I have spent my entire adult life making complicated things simple for other people. I have looked at disaster, at debt, at fraud, at years of financial ruin compressed into a spreadsheet, and I have found the logic underneath. I have made sense of things that seemed impossible to untangle. But I could not make sense of that sentence.
Not yet.
Welcome back to Secret Revenge, where the people who kept the books for everyone else finally opened their own accounts and read what was always written there. My name is Mara. I'm 38 years old. And on the day my sister said I was not invited to her wedding, I made a decision. Not an angry one. Not a tearful one. A quiet one, the way I make all my decisions now, because I learned the hard way that quiet is the only language some people finally listen to. This is the story of what happened when I showed up anyway. But to understand why I showed up, you need to understand what I gave away first. I grew up in a house that smelled like lemon dish soap and low-grade anxiety. My mother, Diane, kept the house spotless. She had a system for everything, a drawer for everything, a schedule for everything, a smile for every neighbor who walked past the front window. My father, Raymond, worked at the shipping yard and came home quiet, not cold, just depleted, like a phone battery that never quite charged back to full. Then there was my sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 4 years younger than me, and she had what my mother used to call the light. I don't say that with bitterness. I mean it literally. People turned toward her the way you turn toward a window. She was funny and warm and charismatic in a way that seemed effortless, and growing up, I loved her for it. I genuinely did. She was my little sister, and I thought she hung the moon. I was the other one. Not ugly, not unkind, just functional. Reliable. The one who got good grades because she studied, not because anything came easily. The one who sat at the kitchen table at 11 at night, working through math problems, while Vanessa breezed through her homework in 20 minutes and went to watch television. My mother loved us both. I believe that. But love can be distributed unevenly without anyone meaning any harm, and in our house, attention flowed like water, always finding the lowest point, always pooling where the ground was softest. Vanessa needed more reassurance. Vanessa had more friends to navigate. Vanessa had more feelings that needed to be talked through at the dinner table. I learned to need less. That was the first lesson I was taught, without anyone meaning to teach it. Mara can handle it. Mara is fine. The day it became official, the day the pattern stopped being invisible and became load-bearing, was the night of my college graduation. I was 22. I had graduated with honors from the accounting program at State University. I was the first person in my immediate family to finish a 4-year degree. My father shook my hand at the ceremony with tears in his eyes, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment. We went to dinner at a restaurant my mother had chosen. It had white tablecloths and a bread basket, and everything felt expansive and possible. I was wearing a blue dress I had bought with money I had earned at my part-time job at the campus library. Halfway through the appetizers, my mother put down her fork. "Mara," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you say no." I remember the exact feeling in my chest, like a door closing very gently. "Vanessa's been struggling with her art program," my mother said. "She needs to stay another semester. And with your father's back, we've had some extra medical bills. We're a little short." I looked at Vanessa. She was looking at her salad. "I've already got a job lined up," I said. I did. I had accepted a position at a mid-size accounting firm in the city, starting in 2 weeks. "I know," my mother said. "That's why I'm asking you." That was the first entry in what I would later call, privately, in the notebook I kept under my bed, the family ledger. Entry 1. Vanessa's extra semester. $3,200.
June.
I told myself, she's my sister. It's one semester. This is what families do. I was right that families do things for each other. I was wrong about what once meant. The job was good. I was good at it. There is something deeply satisfying about bringing order to chaos, about finding the number that explains everything, about being the person in the room who can look at a financial statement and tell you exactly where the pain is coming from and what it will cost to fix it. I rented a small apartment. I bought a used car. I started building what I thought of as my life, the scaffolding of it at least. Savings account. A couch I'd picked out myself. A window box with herbs that I actually kept alive. The calls from home started small. A phone bill here. A car repair there. The context always shifted, but the structure was always the same. Something has come up, we're a little short, you know how things are, you've always been so responsible. I was 23 when Vanessa dropped out of her art program entirely. She'd met a man, or rather a series of men, in rapid succession, and had decided she was going to be an event planner instead. My mother thought this was exciting. Vanessa had vision, my mother said. She just needed time to find her path. The invoice for the event planning certification course arrived in my inbox as a forwarded email. My mother had already signed Vanessa up. The cost was $1,400. Entry 2. Event planning certification. $1,400.
March.
I was 24 when my father's back got worse, and he had to stop working for 3 months. I sent money for the mortgage, not all of it, but enough to close the gap. This one I don't resent even now. My father was in real pain. He wasn't asking for anything. My mother asked, and he sat quietly in his recliner and looked ashamed about it, and that shame made it impossible for me to say no. Entry 3. Mortgage gap. $2,800. February, April. I was 25 when I met David. David was a landscape architect. He was gentle and funny and had this way of noticing things, the angle of light on a building, the way a tree had grown around a fence post, the small beautiful accidents of the natural world. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. We dated for a year. He asked me to move in with him. I said yes. I didn't tell my mother for 3 weeks, because I knew what she would say. I knew she would frame it as abandonment. I knew she would find a reason why this was hard for her. When I finally told her, she cried. Not angry tears. Sad ones. She said, I just don't know how we'll manage. At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Later, I understood she had meant financially. I moved in with David anyway. That was one of the few times I held my ground, and I want to tell you that it felt like strength, but honestly it felt like crossing a border without a passport. Technically possible, but terrifying the whole way through. David and I were happy. For almost 2 years, we were genuinely happy. He drew plans for a back garden he wanted us to have someday. I kept a folder on my computer labeled house stuff that I added things to when I saw them, tile patterns, paint colors, a particular style of kitchen window. It was the first time I had ever planned for a future that was entirely mine. Then Vanessa's first business failed. She had opened a small event planning company. It had not been successful, for reasons that were not entirely her fault. The market was competitive, and she genuinely had not been given a realistic picture of what running a business required. But she had also borrowed money for equipment she didn't need, and taken on clients she couldn't serve, and when the company collapsed, she had debt. The call came on a Tuesday night. My mother's voice was very controlled, which was always the sign that something was actually serious.
She told me the amount.
She said Vanessa was devastated. She said the family was going to have to come together. I looked at David across the dinner table. He was watching me. He had learned, by then, what these calls meant. Entry 5. Vanessa's business debt. $6,500. November. I borrowed the logic I always used. She's my sister. She's trying. She's going through something hard. This is what you do. David didn't argue. He just got quieter over the following weeks. And I, being an accountant, being someone who was professionally skilled at ignoring the warning signs in a ledger when the client didn't want to see them, told myself the quietness was fine. It wasn't fine. 6 months later, David sat down with me and said, Mara, I need you to choose. He wasn't being cruel. He was being honest, which is harder. He said he loved me. He said he could see that I loved my family. He said he didn't know how to build a life with someone who kept giving their future away with both hands. I didn't choose him. I told myself it was because I couldn't abandon my family, and that was part of it. But the fuller truth, which I have had years to examine, is that I didn't believe, at that point, that I deserved the garden. I didn't believe the future in that folder on my computer was really meant for me. I had spent so many years being the person who provided stability for others that I had stopped being able to imagine myself as the person who received it. Being the foundation is not the same as having a home. I moved back to a solo apartment. David sent me a card 6 months later, just a card, no return address. He was moving to another city for a project. He said he hoped I was well. I kept the card in my notebook, tucked between 2 pages, where it stayed for years. If you've ever let something good walk out the door because you didn't think you were worth keeping it, drop a word in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who did that. The years between 26 and 34 are the years I think of as the slow arithmetic. Every year, reliably, there was a new entry. Some were small, some were not small. But the rhythm was so established by then that I had stopped questioning it. I had started treating it the way you treat a utility bill. You don't feel something about it. You just pay it. Entry 8. Vanessa's apartment deposit. $2,200. Entry 9. My mother's dental work. $1,700. Entry 11. Vanessa's car payment gap. $900. Entry 14. My father's specialist visit, not covered. $3,400. Entry 17. Vanessa's second business startup costs. $4,000. By the time I turned 31, I had given my family, in direct transfers, covered bills, and interest-free loans that were never repaid, a total of $47,300. I know that number exactly because I kept the ledger. Every entry, every date, every amount, not because I planned to use it. At the time, I just kept it the way some people keep a diary because writing things down made them feel real, and feeling real was the only way I knew how to process something that otherwise felt like water I was trying to hold in my cupped hands. $47,300. That was a down payment on a house. That was 3 years of savings. That was a safety net I did not have when, in the spring of my 32nd year, my father died. He went quickly, which was a mercy and also a cruelty because it meant there was no time to prepare. A Tuesday. A call from my mother. The hospital. An hour. I drove 4 hours to be there. I sat in the waiting room, and then I sat in the family room, and then I sat with my mother, who held my hand and did not speak for a long time, and I was grateful for that silence because it was the most honest thing we had shared in years. But within 48 hours of the funeral arrangements beginning, something shifted. My mother sat Vanessa and me down and told us the financial situation. My father had not had life insurance. It had lapsed 2 years earlier, a fact neither of them had mentioned to me.
There was some debt.
The house had a mortgage with 14 years left on it. Vanessa immediately began crying again. She said she didn't know what they were going to do. She said she couldn't handle this on top of everything. And my mother looked at me. Not Vanessa.
Me.
I paid for the funeral. That's entry 22. $8,900. I continued contributing to the mortgage for the next 18 months. That's entries 23 through 40, a total of $14,400. And I did all of this while grieving my father alone, in my apartment for hours away, because I still had a job to do and clients to serve and quarterly reports to file, and nobody in my family called to ask how I was doing. That is not a small sentence. I want to let it sit. Nobody called to ask how I was doing. My father was dead. I had paid for his funeral. I had covered the gap in the mortgage so my mother and sister could stay in the house. And not one person asked if I was sleeping. Not one person asked if I needed anything. Not one person said the words, "Mara, are you okay?" I developed insomnia. I lost 12 pounds I didn't have to lose. I sat at my desk at work with spreadsheets open in front of me and sometimes just stared at the numbers for minutes at a time without seeing them. I had a therapist eventually. I found her on a Tuesday in October when I realized I had driven to work and could not account for 20 minutes of the commute. Her name was Dr. Ellison. She had a plant in her office that was slightly too large for its pot, which I found obscurely comforting. She asked me in our third session to describe my family in 3 words. I said, "They love me." She waited. I said, "They just don't notice me." She said, "Tell me more about the difference." I couldn't, not then. But I went home and I opened my notebook and I wrote, "Being loved and being considered are 2 different currencies, and I have been paid in the wrong one my whole life." The distance started quietly, the way most important things start. I stopped volunteering information. I answered calls, but stopped initiating them. I showed up for holidays for another year, and then I stopped showing up for holidays, and when my mother asked why, I said I had been busy, which was true enough not to feel like a lie. I focused on work. I got promoted. I built a small but real client base of my own, 3 small businesses that I helped reorganize their finances, 1 nonprofit whose books were a disaster that I spent a full quarter untangling.
There was satisfaction in that.
Not happiness, exactly, but the clean, grounded satisfaction of doing something well. I was not happy, but I was building something. Quietly. The way you build things when you've learned not to announce them, because the people around you have a history of redirecting your resources before they can become yours. I moved to a different city. A deliberate choice, not a dramatic one. I wanted geography between me and the pattern. I told my mother I was relocating for work, which was partially true. She said she understood. She probably didn't. What I did not know, and would not discover for years, was what was being said about me at home in my absence. I found out later, through a cousin, inadvertently, at a grocery store encounter, that the family story about Mara had evolved in my absence into something quite specific. The version being told to relatives and neighbors, and anyone who asked, was this: Mara left.
We don't know why.
She was always a little distant. We try to reach out, but she doesn't respond. Not a lie, technically. Just a version edited with surgical precision to remove every cause and retain only the effect. My cousin said, genuinely puzzled, "I always wondered why you stopped coming around. Your mom makes it sound like you just disappeared." I said, "I didn't disappear. I just stopped being visible to people who weren't looking." She didn't know what to make of that. I changed the subject. There is a notebook. I've mentioned it. It was a plain, dark blue notebook I bought at a drugstore the year I graduated college, the night before the dinner where my mother made her first ask. I don't know why I bought it that night. Some part of me must have known. I carried that notebook for 16 years. I wrote entries in it on the nights when I needed to make the invisible visible. I wrote dollar amounts and dates. I wrote the things people said to me and what I said back, and what I really meant but didn't say. I wrote the name, David, 12 times in different handwriting styles one night when I couldn't sleep, which tells you something about grief and its strange expressions. On the inside back cover, in handwriting that got progressively more settled over the years as I aged into myself, I had written a single line that I'd copied from something Dr. Ellison had said once: "A record is not a weapon. It is a witness." I was 35 when Vanessa got engaged. I found out through social media. A photo, a ring, a caption. He asked, I said yes, life is beautiful. I sent her a text that said, "Congratulations, Ness. I'm really happy for you." She responded with a heart emoji. That was the whole conversation. I did not expect to be part of the wedding. I told myself I didn't. But the heart emoji sat in my chest for 3 days like a small stone, and I understood that something in me had been waiting all those years for a different kind of response. For her to call. For her to say, "Mara, I know things have been strange between us. I want you there." The stone got heavier when, for weeks later, my mother called. She told me about the wedding plans with the enthusiasm of someone telling a story she expected to be welcomed into joyfully. The venue, the flowers, the color scheme. I listened. I asked 1 or 2 questions. And then, near the end of the call, I said, "Am I invited?" There was a pause. "Of course you're invited," my mother said, in a voice that carried something careful in it. I just don't know if Vanessa, you know she's been stressed about the guest list. Let me talk to her. She called back 2 days later. She said, Vanessa thought it might be less complicated without you there. And there it was. Less complicated. The word she would eventually use herself on that 4-minute call when she told me directly. I hung up and sat very still in my apartment for a long time. I looked at the window box with the herbs, which had multiplied over the years into a genuine small garden. Mint and basil and thyme and lavender, which I had learned to grow because it reminded me of David's drawings, those careful, gentle plans for a garden we never got to have. I opened my notebook. I looked at the total. And I made my quiet decision. I want to pause here and ask, has anyone ever told you that your absence is the problem when your presence was the one that was being used all along? I genuinely want to know. Leave in the comments, because that question has been living in me for years. The family crisis that brought everything to a surface came 6 weeks before the wedding. Vanessa's fiancé, a man named Curtis, whom I had never met, had a family of his own, and Curtis's family had money, and Curtis's family had an accountant, and that accountant had done a standard financial background review as part of some inheritance matter. What the accountant found, apparently, was that Vanessa had tax issues. Not fraudulent ones. Just the kind of compounding, disorganized tax mess that happens when someone has multiple failed businesses and inconsistent income and has never had a professional help them organize it. The amount owed was significant. I heard the number through my mother, who called me in a different voice than usual, a voice that was trying to sound casual and failing. $41,000. My mother said, I know things have been difficult between you and Vanessa.
But she needs you, Mara.
You're an accountant. Your family. And there, right there, was the entry I had been expecting for 16 years. The ask that would require me to give not money, but professional services worth far more than money. My expertise. My reputation. My time. The thing I had built entirely alone, in the years they had not been watching. I said, let me think about it. My mother said, of course. Take all the time you need. She called back in 18 hours. I said yes. But I said yes on terms. And the terms included a meeting. An in-person meeting. With Vanessa present. I arrived at my mother's house on a Thursday morning with my laptop and my briefcase and my notebook. Vanessa was there. She looked beautiful, which she always did, and she looked tired, which she hadn't always. She hugged me at the door, which I wasn't expecting, and it landed wrong. Stiff on both sides, like two people following a stage direction neither of them had rehearsed. My mother made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the birthday dinner had happened when I was 22, and I opened my laptop, and I began. I walked them through Vanessa's tax situation in precise, clear language. I explained what had happened, what was owed, and what could be done. I told her the situation was fixable, not painless, but fixable. Then I closed my laptop. And I opened my notebook. Vanessa's eyes went to it immediately. She recognized it somehow, or maybe she just felt it, the weight of a thing that has been kept a long time. I said, before I agree to help with this, I want to have a conversation that's been a long time coming. My mother started to say something. I kept going. I have kept a record, I said. Not to punish anyone, because I needed to witness my own life while it was happening to me. And what I witnessed over 16 years was this. I read the ledger out loud. Every entry, every date, every amount. Entry 1 June. Vanessa's extra semester. $3,200. Entry 2 March. Event planning certification. $1,400. Entry 3 through 5. Medical bills, mortgage gaps, business debt. All the way to entry 47. Mortgage contribution October. $800. It took 9 minutes to read. I know because I had timed myself the night before, practicing in my apartment, because I had learned as an accountant that the presentation of a number matters as much as the number itself. When I finished, the kitchen was completely silent. My mother's face had gone very still. Vanessa had her hand over her mouth. The total, I told them, was $63,800. Not $47,300, That had been the number at 31. The ledger had continued. It always had. $63,800. Plus the professional services I was currently being asked to provide, which I had priced at market rate, $4,500. Total, $68,300. I said, I am telling you this number not because I want it back. I'm telling you because you invited me back into this family as a resource, and I want us all to be clear about what I have already given this family and what it has cost me. Not just in money, in time, in David, in a down payment that became your mortgage, in a savings account I never built, in years of carrying something alone that I was told, by everyone who says they love me, I would not have to carry alone. Vanessa started crying. Not performed crying. Real crying, the kind that starts behind the eyes and takes the whole face. She said, I didn't know the total. I said, I know. She said, Mara, I didn't. Nobody told me. I knew you helped, but I didn't know it was $63,800, I said. And I need you to know that I know you didn't calculate any of this. I know you weren't keeping a ledger of what you were taking. But that's part of what I'm telling you. Someone needs to have kept a ledger. I was the only one who did. My mother had not spoken. I looked at her. She said, You kept a record of everything we asked you for. Yes, I said. All these years. Yes. She said, That feels like a betrayal. And there it was. The callback I hadn't planned but should have expected. I looked at her. I said, Mom, I need you to really hear what you just said. She blinked. You asked me to be the accountant of his family's needs for 16 years, I said, and when you found out I kept the books, you called it a betrayal. The silence that followed that sentence was one of the longest I have ever sat in. The wedding was 3 weeks later. My mother had called me twice in the intervening time. Vanessa had called me 4 times. The early calls were about the tax situation, practical, which I handled. The later calls were about the wedding. Vanessa asked me to come. Not as a role, not as a bridesmaid, because she had her bridesmaids selected. Just as her sister, she said,
Just to be there.
I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I went. I wore a dark green dress. I sat in the 4th row. I had not told anyone I was coming. When I walked into the venue, a garden space, of all things, with climbing roses on white trellises and lanterns in the trees, I saw my mother first. She saw me, and something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't exactly welcome. It wasn't exactly surprise. It was something more complicated than either. I sat down. The ceremony was genuinely beautiful. Curtis was nervous and earnest and looked at Vanessa like she had invented something essential. Vanessa cried, which she always did, and meant it, which she mostly did. And during the reception, while everyone was moving between tables and the music was ambient and gentle, I found a moment alone with my mother. She said, I'm glad you came. I said, I know. She said, I never meant for you to carry so much. And this is the part of the story that is still unresolved for me, because I believe her. I genuinely believe that she did not set out to load one daughter, while the other remained light. I believe that she loved me, does love me, in the only language she learned. But belief and healing are not the same transaction. You can believe someone meant no harm and still need to protect yourself from the harm they caused. Those two things are allowed to coexist. I said, I know you didn't mean it. I need you to know it happened anyway. She looked away. She didn't respond. And that turning away, that was the unanswered letter. The thing still open. The door that never fully closed and never fully opened. Later that night, Vanessa found me near the garden wall, away from the noise. She said, I'm going to pay you back. I said, You don't have to. She said, Not all of it. I know I can't. But some of it. And the rest, Mara, I'm sorry. I don't know if sorry is enough. I said, It's a start. And I meant that. I wasn't performing graciousness. Vanessa had never been the architect of the dynamic. She had just been the beneficiary of it, which is a different kind of culpability, one that still requires accountability, but allows for a different kind of forgiveness. I can forgive Vanessa for benefiting from a structure she didn't design. The structure itself, the one that taught us both our roles from childhood, that's a longer conversation, and I'm still in it. I also gave her a reduced bill for the tax work. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. She's my sister. Some debts you collect in full, and some you settle at a discount because you want to leave room for something other than ledger entries. Somewhere between the ceremony and the garden wall, there was a moment. Not dramatic, nothing anyone else would have noticed, when I looked at the trellis with the climbing roses and thought of David's drawings. The ones he had made for a garden we never built. The careful, hopeful lines of a future that never happened. I felt sad about it. Cleanly sad, not bitterly sad, which is a distinction I have had to work for. But I also thought, I am here. I am standing in a garden. I am wearing a dress I bought myself, and I have a business I built myself, and I have a notebook that witnessed my life when no one else did, and I have Dr. Ellison and her slightly too large plant, and the lavender on my windowsill, and 3 small business clients who call me every April saying, "Thank God we have you." That is a life. It is not the life I planned. But I built it from the original materials myself, and it holds. 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten on plain paper from my mother. It was not an apology.
I want to be honest about that.
It was a letter that said many things, that she thought about me, that she hoped I was well, that she had been doing some thinking. But it did not contain the 3 sentences I have sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, imagined her writing. It did not say, "I leaned on you too hard. I saw you as a resource when I should have seen you as a person."
I'm sorry.
She didn't write those sentences. I don't know if she ever will. I kept the letter in my notebook, in the back, next to David's card. 2 unanswered things. 2 open threads. Both of them real. What I know now at 38 that I didn't know at 22. A family is not a financial instrument. Love is not leverage. And the person who always says yes eventually has to learn to say yes to themselves, not out of selfishness, but out of survival, out of the basic understanding that you cannot be a foundation for others if you have nothing underneath you. I am not a martyr. I don't want to be a martyr. I gave money I could have kept. I gave time and expertise and years of emotional energy, and I gave them with open hands, and I don't want to medal for that. I want instead to be a person who gives freely what I choose to give, not what I give because I am afraid of what saying no will cost me. I am still learning that. Some days I am better at it than others. Vanessa made her first repayment 2 months after the wedding. $300 with a note that said, "I'm going to keep doing this."
She has.
It's not a rush, and it will never be the full number, and I have made peace with that. My mother and I talk on the phone on the first Sunday of every month. The conversations are careful and a little formal, like 2 people practicing a language they are both still learning. She has not brought up the ledger again. I have not either. There is an understanding, unnamed, that we are trying. I don't know yet what we're trying toward. I'm willing to find out. Vanessa sent me a photo last month. Her and Curtis in a garden, a real one, grown by them, with tomatoes and sunflowers and something I couldn't identify in the far corner. She had captioned it, "Learning to grow things. Thanks for the example." I don't know if she meant the literal lavender on my windowsill, which she'd seen once years ago, or something larger. Maybe both. I'm choosing to believe both. If you have carried a weight that no one in your family acknowledged, if you have been the quiet one, the capable one, the one who handles things, the one who was so reliable that your reliability became invisible, I want you to know something. The ledger you kept in your head, or in a notebook, or in the tightness in your chest every time the phone rang, that ledger is real. Your sacrifices were real. The life you did not get to live because you were living it for someone else was real. And none of that required anyone to be a villain. That's the part no one tells you. Exploitation can happen at the hands of people who love you, in systems that were never examined, through patterns that were inherited before anyone was old enough to choose. That doesn't make it okay. It just makes it complicated. And complicated, I have learned, is exactly what I was built to handle. The notebook is on my desk as I finish telling you this. Dark blue, worn at the corners. $63,800 and one lifetime of invisible labor witnessed. I don't write in it anymore.
I don't need to.
I am my own record now, and I am the most honest account I have ever kept. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If something in this story felt true to you, if you recognized yourself in the one who always handled it, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're just getting started.